welcome back to the basics. I am Mr. Hall. This is going to be video part 2 explaining damage over time debuffs in Marvel's Contest of Champions mobile game. So, quick disclaimer. In the last video, at the end of it, I explained that one of the champion specific debuffs we were going to be covering was Aftershock. I went back and I looked at it and I decided that is actually not a damage over time debuff. That's just a straight up damage debuff. So it's not so much that it does damage over time, it's just that it has several stacks on it and each stack does a certain amount of damage. So it looks like it's dealing damage over time when really it's just not. It's just ticking away each stack. So we're not going to cover Quake. We're not going to cover Aftershock. Just be aware, especially if you're a newer player, just be aware if you're playing Quake, be careful. She might stack Aftershock damage debuffs on you. It'll look like it's doing damage to you over time, but it's actually not. It's just taking away each one of those stacks. So be careful of that. That can deal quite a bit of damage very quickly. So instead, we're going to start off with the Cold Snap debuff. There are 3 champions in the game currently that inflict Cold Snap, and they are Iceman, Storm Pyramid X, and Vision Arcus. Cold Snap does a little bit more than just dealing damage over time. I think it prevents evade. It might also reduce some other ability accuracy, but I'm not real sure on it all exactly. I think it might differ also from champion to champion, but just watch out for Cold Snap. If Iceman is awakened, you will start the fight with a Cold Snap debuff. There's nothing you can do about it unless you're immune to Cold Snap, which is there are very few champions that are. So that's Cold Snap. We're going to move on to Critical Failure. Now, Critical Failure is a debuff that is specific and unique to Domino only. So Critical Failure is Domino's signature ability. The opponents take up to 1500 energy damage over 1.5 seconds whenever their abilities fail to trigger. Damage scales with base attack only. Potency decreases temporarily for consecutive triggers. What does this mean? If you're playing against a Spider-Man and you're using Domino and Spider-Man tries to evade an attack, he has a chance to actually fail the evade because Domino is lucky. If he fails that evade, he will then suffer damage for failing to evade your attack. And this is only if Domino is awakened. And the higher her signature ability is, the more damage they're going to suffer for failing their abilities. So with mine, with a 5-star, rank 5, and her signature ability being a full maxed out 200, that's as high as the damage you can get for damage over time debuff as far as the Critical Failure. So that's that. Moving on from Domino and her Critical Failure, the next one I want to cover is Omega Red and his Death Spores and his Death Field. This one's kind of tricky. I actually kind of had to do research on this one because, again, kind of like Squirrel Girl, I don't really know him and his utility very much because I have him as a 6-star, but he's not awakened, so I don't really play him that much. So I have him as a 4-star, and he's awakened, but he's a 4-star, and in-game players just don't really use 4-stars that much. So, and I don't really grind in Arena. So I'm pretty unfamiliar with Omega Red, so I'm going to try to stumble through this as best as possible to try to explain it. Okay, I'm going to address his signature ability here in a minute, but I'm going to cover some other things first. So I'm going to come back to this, but I'm going to scroll down here to the section that is Death Factor, okay? While near the opponent, Omega Red inflicts 1 Death Spore every 0.5 seconds, up to a maximum of 10 stacks. Once the opponent is out of range, they lose 1 Death Spore every 0.15 seconds, unless they are suffering from a degeneration debuff. Death Spores are not affected by ability accuracy reduction. Each Death Spore lowers the opponent's armor rating by 100 and reduces their chance to purify debuffs by 10%. Death Spores struggle to affect mechanical components and are inflicted 4 times slower against robots. Okay, so While Omega Red is bleeding, he emits the Death Field. The Death Field causes death spores on nearby opponents to passively degenerate them, dealing 24.98 damage per second for each death spore on them. The Death Field is not affected by ability accuracy reduction, and its damage scales with base attack only. While the Death Field is active, the limit for death spores on the opponent is increased to 30. So, what is all that saying? Basically, if you are fighting a Omega Red, and if you spend too much time close to him, he's going to start stacking these death spores on you. If you inflict him with a bleed debuff, those death spores are actually going to do damage to you. Also, if he's awakened, which most of the AI opponents you're going to face are going to be awakened, if he's awakened, he's going to deal damage to you just spending time near him. So what you want to do is you want to get in, get a couple hits in, and then dash out again and let those death spores fall off before they deal too much damage. So that actually segues pretty nicely into his signature ability. It's called Lethal Dose. It's a passive. It says opponent has 10 or more death spores. Death spores on the opponent deal 317.27 damage per second. This damage scales with base attack only. Omega Red's basic tentacle hits have a 23.71% chance to be unblockable. Now, again, I'm not familiar with the champion, but to me, it sounds like if he's awakened, his death spores will deal damage whether he's bleeding or not. But it sounds like it may only be if the opponent has 10 or more death spores that they will be damaging to you. I'm not sure. This is one of those champions. Again, I just don't know enough about. So just keep in mind, if you're close to Omega Red, he's going to be stacking these death spores on you. They're going to make life difficult for you. They might even do damage to you. Try not to bleed him, because if you bleed him, he will deal damage back to you. It's kind of the same way with Cable. If you inflict bleed on Cable, he's going to degenerate you really, really fast. So try to avoid inflicting bleed on Omega Red. That'll save you a lot of hassle and pain. So moving on from Omega Red and his death stuff, we've got Neurotoxins with Archangel. This one is actually one of my favorite abilities in the game, and he's one of my favorite champions in the game as well. So we've got Archangel here, and we've got Neurotoxins. I'm going to briefly go over Neurotoxins here. So Neurotoxins is a passive. Each time Archangel triggers a bleed effect on an opponent with an active poison buff that he himself caused, they are combined. The bleed and the poison are combined, converting into a Neurotoxin charge lasting 15 seconds. Neurotoxins are a passive effect and therefore do not count as either a debuff or a poison. Neurotoxins do 5,115 damage over their duration. That's a lot. Upon expiring, Neurotoxins have a 100% chance to stun their target for 1.5 seconds. This effect will not interrupt a special attack, meaning if they're already throwing a special attack, you're not going to stop them from throwing a special attack. So that's something else. Now, here's where Neurotoxins are really, really good. This is his awakened ability, his signature ability. It's called Increased Toxicity. The Neurotoxin coating Archangel's wings and claws increases in toxicity, making each Neurotoxin charge cause a 28% reduction in ability accuracy and block all regeneration on the opponent. What does that mean? In other words, let's use Spider-Man again as an example. If you have, say, 3 Neurotoxins on Spider-Man, his ability is going to be reduced so severely he won't be able to evade you at all. So get a couple of Neurotoxins on him, and then you can just wail on Spider-Man until he's dead, because he won't be able to evade. It's also going to stop champions from healing. So if you're going against somebody like Wolverine, you have these Neurotoxins on him, Wolverine won't be able to heal. So that's a good one. This is one of the many, many reasons why Archangel's one of my favorite champions in the game. He's just awesome. He does a lot of damage very quickly, and he prevents a lot of difficult stuff. So that's a good one. And finally, we have the Rupture debuff. There are only 2 champions in the game currently that inflict rupture, and they are Sasquatch and Tigra. Both of those champions are Mystic champions. I was going to cover this one a little bit, but I decided I'll save that for a future video where I'm actually talking about how to use Tigra and what she does and the rupture and all that stuff. So I'll get into that in a future video way down the line, because I don't really think it's something you particularly have to worry about too much. You do a little bit, but it's not as prominent as, say, something like bleed or poison. So just watch out for Tigra and Sasquatch. They're kind of difficult to deal with anyways. So I think that's going to do it for right now. I was going to do footage showing these debuffs in action, but I just kind of got caught up in reading them off to you instead. So I hope that helps. As always, if you have any questions, have anything that doesn't make any sense to you, you want something explained, just let me know, leave a comment. I'll get to it in a future video, or I'll just comment directly to your comment, and we'll get that worked out and figured out for you, okay? Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.